Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hello, good afternoon to you. Listen to this.
My mind is actually changing on this.
Go on.
What is for certain is that the Cleggs, the Blairs, the Adonises will never, ever, ever give up. They will go on whinging and whining and moaning all the way through this process. So maybe, just maybe, I'm reaching the point of thinking that we should have a second referendum.
On what?
On EU membership.
The whole thing?
Yes, of course, of course. Unless you want to have a multiple-choice referendum.
No.
Which would confuse people.
I'm
I think if we had a second referendum on EU membership, we'd kill it off for a generation. The percentage that would vote to leave next time would be very much bigger than it was last time round. And we may just finish the whole thing off.
Well, if you do want to kill it off, Nigel Farage, you want to kill it off for more than a generation, don't you? Why has Nigel Farage said this at this point? And if you still have questions about Brexit, does that mean you're whinging and whining? He alludes to Tony Blair, Lord Adonis, Nick Clegg. But if you're a person who still has questions about our departure and the manner of it from the EU, do you regard yourself as a whinger and a whiner? Probably not. Why has Nigel Farage said this? Now, I asked him to come on to the programme with me. He was in the office earlier on. I asked him to come and join me on air so I could discuss it with him, challenge him on it. But it was a no from Nigel. So you can do that for us all later from 7 when his programme is aired here on LBC. 0345 6060 973. The number to call now, the number to call then. What do you think's going on here? Do you feel, if you're a Brexit voter, and we've had this conversation many times about a second referendum, not on whether we should be in or out, but on the deal, on the nature of the deal. And it's always, from people who voted Brexit, a firm no, that would be to disregard the democratic vote that was that referendum. That's 100% the response. Nobody I've spoken to, I don't think, on this programme wants a second referendum. Those of you who voted Brexit, I mean. So what's going on? Do you feel let down by the man whose face was and arguably is still the face of Brexit? Has he let you down? Has he lost his nerve, maybe? Does he just want one more opportunity? Do you remember the night of the actual referendum when just before the vote started to be announced, he said, yes, I think we've lost. I'm sure we've lost. So we know he can lose his nerve when the stakes are high. Has he lost his nerve here? Does he really want one more opportunity to make sure that the nation wants this, really wants this, in those larger numbers that he says would inevitably come if we had a second referendum? Does he want to really make sure so that if it turns sour when we leave, the nation won't blame him? Is it that his route to America has gone quiet, perhaps? Steve Bannon down and out. Trump not noticeably looking UK-wards at the moment, is he, for sustenance from fellow populists? He's got President Duterte, the murderous Filipino president, for that. He doesn't need Nigel Farage anymore. So what do you say is going on here? A second referendum, says Nigel Farage. Yes, you're not asleep and dreaming. Nigel Farage says maybe, just maybe, he'd like a second referendum on our membership of the European Union. 0345 6060 973. What the heck is going on? 84850, the number to text. You can tweet at LBC. Jared Batten joins me now, UKIP MEP for London and the party's Brexit spokesman. Did you ever think you'd hear these words from your former leader's mouth, Jared?
Hello, Sheila. No, I didn't. I'm totally at a loss to understand this. I can tell you that he doesn't speak for the UKIP MEPs on this. He doesn't speak for the party. And he doesn't speak for Leavers in general. And all the people I've spoken to since this was said this morning are up in arms about it. They're really very, very unhappy that he should say such a thing. It's the kind of thing that you might say in a Brussels bar at 10 o'clock at night when you've had a few drinks. Oh, bloody Remainers getting on my nerve, let's have another referendum. And that's about the gravity that it's actually got.
But do you not believe he is right, then, when he says that a Leave vote would be a resounding... He could be right, that it would be a resounding vote a second time round?
I only agree with two things that he said. The first one was that the Remainers will never give up. They'll carry on whinging and whining forever. The second thing is that he said that we'd win by a bigger majority. I don't doubt that. But we had a referendum. It was made very clear at the time. Now, I don't often quote David Cameron, but I've just re-listened to what David Cameron said in his Chatham House speech, and he said, this is your decision. It's not the decision of politicians or lobby groups. You've got the country's destiny in your hands. It's a final decision, and those people who suggest there will be another renegotiation or another referendum are wrong. Your British people's voice will be respected, and there will not be a second referendum. That was the basis on which the referendum took place. The Prime Minister stood up.
Yeah, he also said he'd implement Brexit, and then he scarpered. I think we can take with a pinch of salt anything David Cameron said on Europe, can't we?
No, with what we're taking him on is the basis on which the referendum was held, and when people cast their votes, the basis on which they cast their votes, and it was won by a clear majority, and that decision, they were promised, would be implemented one way or another.
Were you and all of the Tory Eurosceptics in the 70s, 80s, 90s, were you whingers and whiners, or were you just people with a different view that you held close to your heart and campaigned for legitimately for decades?
Well, that's a good point, because I worked for 25 years to get to the stage.
Well, what were you, a politician or a whinger and whiner?
I was an activist who actually set up a political
So
party.
why are the likes of Lord Adonis whingers and whiners?
Well, if you let me finish my point, we worked for that point of view. Lord Adonis has got his point of view. From the referendum in 1975 until 2016, we had a 41-year period, what you might call a trial membership of the EU. So I tell you what, let's have a 41-year trial membership of being outside.
In what way was it a trial?
And then we can have, because we were seeing how it worked. People were told then that, first of all, in 1975, and unfortunately I'm old enough to remember it, when we had a referendum on would we stay in, remember that we were never asked if we wanted to go in. We were taken in by Ted Heath. But we were told, don't worry, you're not going to lose your sovereignty, you're not going to lose your right to reject legislation that the British government doesn't want. This isn't going to happen, that's not going to happen. It all happened exactly the way people like me said it would over the years, and that's why people made their decision to leave. Now, if people then... Well, let's in 41 years' time, people can come back and say, well, we've had another 41-year period of being out, so now we can have another referendum.
But I think it is astounding to me that you paint yourself and your fellow activists, as you call yourself at the time, you paint yourselves as prophets in your own time, but Nick Clegg, Tony Blair, Lord Adonis and anyone else who argues with you now is a whinger and a whiner. That's very immature.
Well, if this had been a referendum and people had said overwhelmingly that they, by the same margin, that they wanted to stay in, quite frankly, I think I would have retired and said, well, you've made your decision, I'm not spending another 25 years arguing about it. And I would have gone off and done something else and left them to it. And I think a lot of people might have felt the same way. And then it would be for the next generation to decide whether they actually want to be in this thing or whether they decide in...
It's not really answering my question. Why do you not give other people the respect of being activists, campaigners, politicians, when you that's what you've just said you did for 30 years?
Right, what I just tried to say to you is that this was a once-in-a-lifetime decision, as Mr Cameron said, and I would have respected that result. They are not respecting the result of the referendum or the basis on which it was held.
What will this statement from Nigel Farage elicit from your party, Gerard Batten? He's the former leader. He's still a bit of a poster boy for UKIP in many people's minds, whether you like that or not, and he's certainly a poster boy for Brexit. What will this elicit from your party?
A great deal of unhappiness from a lot of people who actually looked up to him for a long time and...
what do you think's behind it? Is it fear?
I don't know. The trouble is now Nigel is a celebrity in his own right. And he's on these shows, he's on other shows, and you always need to say something, and you always need to say something different. What I would hope he would be doing would be standing full square behind the UKIP policy on Brexit, which is not to go about it the way the government are going about it, but actually do it quickly and cleanly under our own steam, rather than going to the Commission and saying, oh, please, sir, Mr Barnier, how may we leave? How much are you going to charge us? And what conditions are you going to impose on us? And actually have a patriotic government and Parliament that did it in its own way under its own steam. And I would like to see him actually talking about our policy rather than making up new policy that the party doesn't want.
Well, he doesn't have to talk about your policy anymore, does he? It's not his job to do so.
He's still a UKIP MEP, and he still leads the MEP, he leads the EFDD group in the European Parliament, so he has a responsibility, and I don't see why he wouldn't want to adhere to the same policies as us, since we spent so long working for the same things. And all this.
So what's your best guess behind it? I mean, my best guess is twofold. It's either attention seeking, which is entirely possible, or it's that nervousness that if leaving the EU turns out to be as problematic, as damaging as, for example, Sadiq Khan's research, the Mayor of London's research he announced today would suggest, I don't know, but if it turns out that way, he doesn't want to be blamed for it. He doesn't want to become a pariah.
I think that it's probably the first one of the options that you actually put there.
Attention seeking.
Yeah, because I've known Nigel for 25 years and I've never known him falter or wave on the idea that we'd be better off outside the European Union. And as we saw in the referendum campaign itself, he was a master at commanding all the arguments about why we'd be better off. So if I had to hazard a guess, then I think I'd come down on the first one of your options.
Is that a weakness?
I think it's very unhelpful. He might be better off actually going off and taking a nice holiday now and relaxing. He's certainly worked very hard.
Will the party discipline him for? Will the party discipline him for going against party policy in such an open way?
It's not actually going against policy, but he's saying something which, and don't forget, he said maybe. He didn't say we should. He's musing an idea, and the idea itself is very unhelpful because it's just given ammunition to our opponents and the people who want to stay in the European Union. So he's not actually proposed a policy. I don't know how serious he was about the idea, but he's been in this job long enough and he's experienced enough to know that he was handing something on a plate to our political opponents, and they must be cock-a-hoop at the moment with that.
They are. Gerard Batten, thank you. UKIP MEP for London and the party's Brexit spokesman. Andrew Adonis, one of the whingers and whiners, according to Nigel Farage, is cock-a-hoop. He says, so Nigel Farage wants a referendum on Mrs May's Brexit deal. I agree, he says. Bring it on. 0345 6060 973. Why has Nigel Farage said this? 84850, the number to text. You can tweet at LBC. It's 2:15. Ashley's called from Manchester to talk about Nigel Farage's surprise statement that he's warming to the idea of a second referendum on our membership of the EU. Not just on the deal, but on our membership of the EU. Ashley, hello.
Hi, Sheila. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. You voted to leave the European Union and you want a second referendum. Tell me why.
Yes, I did vote to leave the European Union. Whether I want what Nigel Farage is explaining as a second referendum is to be contested. What I believe should happen is, I think we've already voted to leave the EU. That was a decision made by the public. I think what should then happen is when the government agrees a deal with the EU, I think we should go to another referendum whereby that deal is put on the table. There's a vote whether we take that deal or whether we just walk away. The blanket statement is we either take that deal, which has been agreed with the EU, or we walk away. I don't think the country needs another referendum, and I don't think that's
on our membership.
Anyone really. On our membership, I think that decision has already been taken.
Are you surprised that that's what he said?
Very surprised, yes.
Do you feel let down?
I'd say I feel let down. I'd say I feel he needs to explain himself more as to...
Well, I asked him on, but he didn't want to come on and talk to me about it.
Does that surprise you?
Not really.
No.
He's on later on his own show, I suppose, when he can control the terms a bit more, I guess. That's
I'm sure
why.
he'll try to explain...
That's why I asked whether he's losing his nerve on the whole thing, that he won't take challenge on it.
I don't think he'll be losing his nerve on it. I just believe that he's probably made a bit of a throwaway statement there. And I think he's clever enough to realise that he's done it for a purpose, and he's probably done it potentially to get back in the press.
Just that's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Don't you think?
I don't know.
I don't know. If you're a politician, if you're a conviction politician, that he sells himself as such, that really has championed a cause that is about to happen, and your biggest priority is just staying in the papers by saying pretty much anything, whether you believe it or not, that's a bit rubbish, isn't it? It's not very edifying.
I wouldn't say it's ideal by any means.
Does it make you disrespect him?
It doesn't make me disrespect him, no. It makes me think that maybe he needs to be taking a break. I think he's done what he needs to do.
He needs to what? Brexit. Oh, taking a break?
Take a break. He's championed Brexit. He's led us out of the European Union, which I think is beneficial. And maybe it's his time now to either completely get involved within Brexit, which he obviously doesn't have an opportunity to do. He's not within, he's not not within the Conservative Party. He can't really have a say on what happens. So therefore, I think it's time for him to probably take a bit of a break and potentially step away.
So do you think is he having a wobble over his sort of relevance in this story any longer? Is that what you think is happening?
I suppose that could be one of the reasons, yeah. I think he's a fantastic figurehead, and it's just a shame he's not in the correct party where he can actually shape leaving the European Union. I think he'd be very beneficial if he was in the correct position.
Conservative Party, you mean?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with the Conservative Party, and I don't wish anyone to be involved in that party.
Well, which is the correct party?
The party which has control at the moment is the Conservative Party, isn't it? So if he was within that party,
well, actually, it's the DUP, isn't it, really? Maybe he should join the DUP.
Well, yeah. Then he'll have a bit of a say over everything, won't he?
Well, thank you, Ashley, for your call. Ashley in Manchester is quite relaxed about a second referendum, as long as it's just on the terms of the deal, not the whether we stay or leave. Henry in Bermondsey, hi.
Hi, Sheila.
Why does Nigel Farage want another referendum, do you think? Or why does he say he does?
Well, I think he does want another referendum, and I think he wants one as soon as possible. And I think it's interesting that your last two callers, being Brexiteers, one leading and the other commentator, both said that Nigel should probably step away for a break now, and that's because they see him as being a bit of a weak link in the process of activating Brexit now. But I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, and I think Nigel wants to arrange a second referendum now while he still believes that he can win, i.e. the Brexit side can win, using social media and companies like Cambridge Analytica and the various slightly nefarious forces that persuaded us last time to vote Brexit, because he knows that when the time comes and we're offered an opinion on the deal that we're offered, i.e. a second referendum on the deal that we're offered, or to stay within the EU or to walk away and trade on WTO rules, he knows that at that point Brexit would lose.
Well,
and we would remain
he says not.
EU.
He says not. He says it will be an even bigger victory. Let's go for it.
That's why he wants it now, because now it might be. Now he might still be able to persuade many more people to vote to leave the EU, because he can sort of play on the fact that we've all been waiting around for so long and it looks like the EU are not letting us and we're not getting on with it. But actually what's happening is it's proving incredibly difficult and incredibly costly. So when the time comes and we're almost forced to leave with no deal or to accept a terrible deal because of our own actions, I'm confident that most people would say, no, I'd rather stay within the EU, thanks very much. And I think he knows that too. I think he'd rather get another referendum out of the way now and consolidate his position.
Is he worried about being blamed for things, do you think?
Yes.
If we get a terrible deal.
Probably is. I think he probably is, yes. But then I think he would probably blame that on the EU, and he would rely on the fact that he's not been party to the most minute of details within the negotiation. So he can quite honestly say, well, I wanted us to come out of the EU because I hate the institution and I think it's weak, but I was never given a chance to negotiate our exiting position, so it's not my fault. I think that's probably what he will say for the rest of his life, even though he and the actions of him will put us in an incredibly disadvantageous position for...
Well, it wasn't just him, was it? It was the actions of millions and millions of voters who voted and said they wanted it. You know, he had support and he garnered support. He was successful in his campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what I find interesting now is there are a few people who are still quite interested in what's going on, and we listen to you on the radio every day and we talk about it. And then there are a few politicians who have to be interested because we're paying them to be. And then the great swathe of country are actually not bothered anymore. You know, I go to see my in-laws for Christmas and they just say, oh, I'm not bothered.
I've moved on.
Leaving. Have we not left yet? Have we not left? You know, and they've moved on, or they're just not interested. And I think that's pretty dangerous, actually, because what we'll end up with is a really weak position for this great country within worldwide affairs, that everybody will say, well, I didn't see that coming, because they took their eye off the ball.
Henry, you'll enjoy this. Nick Clegg has just tweeted, I agree with Nigel. There you go.
Well, I'm sure he does, because he will he will always want another referendum, because he always wants another chance to vote to stay in and persuade the public to stay in.
Henry, thank you for your call. Henry in Bermondsey. I agree with Nigel, says Nick Clegg. Ooh, sounds wrong, doesn't it? Jatinder in Colnbrook. Hello.
Hi, Sheila.
You agree with Nigel? Why?
As in, I am a Remainer.
Yeah.
I make no, I don't. I'm an arch Remainer, and I believe that the reason why I believe that I sort of agree with Nigel is because he knows that at the moment in the media, or certain segments of the media, the kind of line that's being thrown out there is that the EU's not giving us a very good deal. They're playing a very hard line, even though the facts of this case is actually that they've always outlined their position. A lot of things that was discussed in the referendum, which probably from the Remain side wasn't made as clear, was that the EU is going to be there to protect the remaining members of the state, as they would do had we stayed in the EU and another state was going to leave. But in terms of as we start getting issues like that are slowly coming out by some segments of the media which are reporting on things like the potential nursing crisis which we're facing because of the potential impact of Brexit, and it's not being mentioned as much, while that's sort of on the back burner in the mainstream media. Because, for example, up with how the vote eventually turned out, there was quite a lot of people that was sort of on the fence, and quite a few of them went to the Leave side. But if you've got some people there that were voting Remain just at the time because they were unsure, they will probably be feeling more aggrieved by the stance that the EU have at the moment, which may, if there was to be a referendum in the short term, would make them apt to probably vote to leave, which is why I think Nigel Farage has identified that, and he's trying to act upon it.
He wants his vote, or the vote, which he supports, obviously, he wants it reinforced. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because then what it would do then is, at the moment where they say this whole line of will of the people, it's still quite a small majority. But if at some point down the road he was able to get a bigger majority before the real impacts of a potential hard Brexit or Brexit itself was to happen, he can then say, well, it was the will of the people. After all the facts came out, they still believe in a bigger majority than in the first place. That it's a good thing. He can kind of wash his hands with it.
OK, thanks, Jatinder, for your call. Jatinder in Colnbrook. It's just occurred to me while rereading details of the meeting a few days ago between Nigel Farage and Michel Barnier. Did Michel Barnier hypnotise him in some way? Who knows? Let's talk more about this. Nigel Farage, as the face of the Brexit movement, says he wants a second referendum, or maybe, just maybe, were his words, a second referendum on our membership of the EU might kill off the issue for a generation, were his words. 0345 6060 973. If you voted to leave the EU, if Nigel Farage is indeed your poster boy for leaving the EU for Brexit, do you feel let down by that statement? 84850, the number to text. You can tweet at LBC. Coming up as well, a sharp rise in flu cases in England. Maybe he's got the flu. With more patients seeing GPs and hospital admissions. That's in the first week of this year. We'll talk about the impact that is having, along with everything else on the NHS. It's 2:31. Well, I suppose from 7 tonight here on LBC, Nigel Farage can account for himself and say why he said what he said on The Right Stuff this morning with Matthew Wright, the TV programme on Channel 5. He said, maybe, just maybe, we should have a second referendum on our membership of the EU. And I'm just ruminating with you as to why he might have said that. Some of you say it's attention-seeking. I'm wondering whether he's losing his nerve about the whole picture, and if indeed Brexit turns out not to be good for Britain. It might be, but if it turns out not to be, is he concerned that he'll go down as the man responsible for the pain? Who knows? Or maybe he just wants some attention. Maybe you're right when you say that. Mary's called from Ealing. Your theory is this is linked to the Barnier meeting the other day with Michel Barnier, Mary. Tell me why.
I just think that his comment has come so soon after that meeting. Something must have gone on in the meeting. There was some discussion. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall. And he decided, I think I'd better take this advice, or whatever they talked about is...
So do you think the famous Gallic charm of Michel Barnier has worked on Nigel Farage? He'll hate me for saying that, I'm sure. It would work on me.
Oh, exactly. He even said that Michel was such a courteous, lovely person.
Very civil man, yeah.
He said civil, very civil, courteous man. So something went on in that meeting, because it's too soon after the meeting that this happened. I just think there must be a link to it. Something went on there. And maybe Barnier wasn't the only one at the meeting. We don't know.
What do you think went on?
Well, maybe he offered him a little, a carrot. He offered him a carrot. Come along, Nigel. And if we did this. I mean, Nigel's an intelligent person. I like Nigel, but I think Nigel is number one, and the fact that he was friendly with Donald and all this, and no, he knows what side his bread's buttered. So whatever Michel, the beau Michel said, something happened.
Oh, Mary, you're a sucker for Michel Barnier, aren't you?
Yes.
Mind you, when David Davis first described him, he said he's very French and what did he say? Very French and very elegant. So he's a sucker for him too. But it was interesting that Nigel Farage called for that meeting, and it was perfectly legitimate of him to call for that meeting, or requested the meeting, saying that he didn't think the views of the 17.4 million who voted to leave had been expressed before to Monsieur Barnier, which begs the question, what does he think David Davis has been doing in the negotiations?
But David Davis maybe has a different approach to Michel. I think
to Nigel, you mean?
In a different way. David Davis is an entirely different character, isn't he?
Yes.
Entirely different personality and different way of dealing with things. So that I think it's just a question of the charm, and let's get on with this and let's see what we can do together. Because I think they're quite close in a set. Although he's always going on about, the European Parliament and they're this and this and this, they're still, he's going to get his pension from them and everything. It's like,
so far. Are you suggesting? Hang on. Are you suggesting we're having a prodigal son moment here?
Well, possibly.
That he doesn't want to leave home after all.
Exactly, possible. It's very possible. Very possible.
It's interesting in the press conference he gave in a pub after the meeting. He was Nigel Farage. This is he said, I asked Monsieur Barnier, who do you represent? Who do you represent in this place? And he said, 10,000 people here earning more than the British Prime Minister with pensions and all the rest of it. I'm quoting him now. Is this what you represent, or do you represent the workers in the member states? Michel Barnier, he said they are both the same thing. I'm not so sure they are, said Nigel Farage. And when he was asked by a German reporter, who do you represent? What are you doing? He said, I'm trying to represent the view of those who voted Brexit, because it isn't really being heard. We didn't vote for transition deals, which I think is, in light of what he said today, that statement is really interesting. I'm trying to represent the view of those who voted Brexit. Well, my guess is that a lot of people who voted Brexit won't welcome what Nigel Farage has said today and won't regard it as him representing them.
Absolutely not. No, they won't. And he's got to clarify. I think probably on his show tonight, he will clarify what his meaning was, and people will phone him and challenge him what's going on here, Nigel. So we might get a better, clearer understanding of it then. But
well, listen, it's been lovely to talk to you, Mary, and it's great being Nigel Farage's warm-up act for his show at 7:00 here on LBC. Do call 0345 606 0973. Chris in Harley Street, hello.
Yeah, good afternoon, Sheila. What's a turnpike? That's my...
Turncoat. Turnpike? Turncoat?
Oh, sorry, did I say turncoat? Sorry. Yeah, he's been going on and on about no second referendum. And now he's bowing down to these people who think that those like me who voted for Brexit are thick and stupid. I knew that we were going to leave the single market, the customs, etc., etc., etc.
You regarded that as Brexit amounted to all of those things?
Yeah, and I knew that was coming, and I left it to Theresa May to deal with it. And now we've got all these whingers and whiners and Ramonas, etc., etc. Fight the battle. Fight the battle. They start wearing. Don't let them wear us down.
So he has let you down, Chris.
Yeah, I think. Well, he hasn't let me down. It's just the way he's been going on, and now he's sort of said, "Oh well, hold on, let's have a second referendum." No,
but he's wobbled before, hasn't he? Do you remember the night of the referendum? He had a wobble, didn't he? Before the result became clear.
Oh, I didn't sort of really watch it on the night, but I
should have been listening to LBC. Shame on you. Next time, when we have that second referendum, Iain and I will be here overnight for LBC. Nigel Farage will probably be in the room with us. That'll be fun.
No, we will not be having a second referendum.
Oh, don't speak too soon, Chris. Not if Monsieur Farage has anything to do with it. We might well. Richard has called from Shepherd's Bush, and I think you're a bit upset with me, Richard.
Just a little. You're making yourself, I believe, sound more like the Winders that Nigel Farage is talking about. I'm a Remainer, but if there was another vote, I would change my mind. I don't want to have the European money system, and I don't want to have a European army. Not that I'm old enough too old to go in it.
So you've changed your mind since the referendum, yeah?
Yes, yeah, because of all the things that the Remainers said that would never happen, is all happened since we've voted for Brexit. I think Nigel Farage is making a smart move, because I do think more people now would change their mind from remaining to leave the European Union. I don't think he's changed his mind. I think he's just trying to back it up and secure it.
So you think he's sniffed the wind and wants to capitalise on it?
Yes, but each time you mention it, you're saying, "Oh, has he changed his mind? Doesn't he know where he's going?"
Well, I'm asking questions because I'm trying to work out why he has suddenly said this, which he has been vehemently against all along. That's what I'm doing, is trying to really. I mean, I could ask him directly if he'd have joined me. I asked him to join me in the studio for the whole hour if he wanted to, but he didn't fancy the idea.
I listen to you every afternoon, or most afternoons, and you're a very smart woman, and you know exactly why he said it.
I don't. I genuinely don't know why he said it.
Oh, well, okay.
Well, I've heard your theory, and it's as good as any, but I still don't know. I'll listen in from 7 and find out why he said it and see if I believe it. Thanks very much indeed, Richard. Richard in Shepherd's Bush. Colin has called from Finchley to carry on our conversation about Nigel Farage's surprise to me anyway, that he thinks maybe, just maybe, those were his words, maybe, just maybe, it is time for a second referendum on our EU membership. What's he playing at, Colin?
Hi, Sheila. Thanks for talking to me. Sheila, before I say what I'm going to say, I voted to stay in, OK? So now, you know, but not for me, for my grandchildren's sake, because I've had the T-shirt, so it don't make no difference to me now. But he's a little bit like Donald Trump. He tells people what they want to hear. And he got up and he was telling people your lives are going to be better once we're out, and, you know, those people who are struggling. And their lives ain't going to be better because we're coming out the common market, you know. And now he's just brainwashes people, and unfortunately they fell for it. And if we was to go to the country tomorrow, everybody would vote to stay in, because they all know they've made a mistake. Well, and I'm not a politician, and I read, you know, but that's my view on it. And if we come out and go back in, we'll have to have the euro, because we've got to negotiate again to come back in, because we're out now. We've given the Article 50.
Colin, you say that Remain would win resoundingly. Nigel Farage obviously feels the opposite, or says the opposite is the case. Yeah. What do you hear around you that convinces you a Remain vote would result, a second referendum would result in a Remain vote?
Well, I hear people, what they're frightened about is people are losing their jobs, you know? People, you know, like, because most of we do a lot of work with Europe, and everything's going to go up, because you're going to start going back to years ago when I was a kid, and we were buying from Europe. We weren't in the common market. We had taxes of import duties, you know, and we're all going to go back to virtually what we were, you know. I mean, to come out, I don't see what we're achieving to come out.
All right, Colin, thank you. Colin in Finchley. For a man who says it doesn't matter to him, I think secretly it does. Colin, thank you for your passion. Nick in Slough, hello.
Hey, Sheila, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. You're a Leave voter, are you?
Yeah, I'd like to say, nice bit of scaremongering from your last caller.
Okay.
That's gone away. Yeah, I'm a massive Leave voter, Sheila. I agree with Nigel that if we did have another referendum on the EU, I believe, judging from the Remain people that I spoke to on Facebook, Twitter and in person, I believe the Leave vote would be much greater if we was having one. But I'm so disappointed, Sheila, that he's even suggested this, he's even put it on the table, he's even, to go on the right stuff and to announce it on there. He's really disappointed a lot of Leave voters. And it's not the only time he's let down a lot of Leave voters.
He could have at least waited to give LBC the exclusive, couldn't he?
Well, there you go.
If you think about it.
That's the main issue. But no, he said before, did he or did he not, if there was any backtracking over Brexit, he would come straight back, return to frontline politics. There's been a lot of backtracking and he hasn't come back. So it's not the first time that it's angered and annoyed Leave voters. I'm not sure what's going through his head. Now, his pathetic excuse was, we might have to have another referendum to kill off the likes of Lord Adonis, Nick Clegg and the Tony Blairs. What a pathetic excuse. We had the vote. The vote was done, so there's no need to even suggest this. I don't know what's gone through his head recently, Sheila.
Also, only one of those men is now an elected politician, so Lord Adonis.
But, I know people have said that the meeting he had 2 days ago, Michelle Barnier and whatever else, but, he's like I said, he said he returned to frontline politics if there's any backtracking. He didn't. He was swanning around in America, and then he was too busy on your show. So,
he's not coming on my show. He's got his own show.
No, on LBC in general, he was too busy doing that. He said he'd return that, and he didn't. Make no mistake, Sheila, I'm a massive fan of Nigel. He was one of my role models. I've done a lot of campaigning and leafleting during.
But do you feel let down by him?
Oh, 100%. And like I said, it's not the first time. And many, many Leave voters that I know, all the Leave voters that I know through Facebook, Twitter and person, don't want another referendum, and they're so disappointed that he's even suggested this on TV. And, a great call earlier from Gerard Batten, because he did make it clear that, and I agree, if Nigel Farage was to just say this after a few pints at the pub, as like a comic statement, then it'd be okay. But to say it with a serious face on the right stuff in front of millions of viewers, and especially the right stuff, they're so left-wing, it's unbelievable. So, a lot of Remainers are now briefly rubbing their hands because of Nigel Farage, the biggest, like I said, the poster boy for Leave. He's let us all down.
But if you feel that it would be a massive Leave vote, the previous caller felt it would be a Remain vote, but if you feel it would be an even bigger Leave vote, as Nigel Farage says he believes, what's the problem? Yeah. It really would send a message to Remainers, wouldn't it?
No, but we don't need to send a message. The message was sent on June, when I woke up at 5 a.m. on June 24th.
It's not, because the whingers and whiners won't go away. The negotiations are still ongoing.
That's down to them. Don't worry about the people that are whinging and whining. That's what I said his pathetic excuse was. Let's have another referendum. So then Lord Adonis, Nick Clegg and Tony Blair can shut up. No, just ignore them. They're bitching and moaning. Let them carry on.
All right, Nick. Thank you, Nick in Slough. Quick word with John in Derby before we go to the news at 3. Hello, John.
Hi. Basically, my position is that this is the only way to legitimise any outcome from Brexit. We can't leave or remain without having the people ratify it, because so much has changed. Brexit, which was offered by the Leave campaign, is completely detached from what's actually happening now, and there's a significant amount of damage which has been done to the economy, and there's been loads of lies arguably on both sides, more on one side than the other, that have been revealed to have not been true, and it's basically the only way to actually leave with and accept it as a democratic will of the people, because 3 years is a lot of time for the will of the people to change.
John, thank you for your call. That's John in Derby. A really interesting hour. A number of Leavers saying they feel let down by Nigel Farage, a bit confused about why he said what he said. You can hear him from 7 here on LBC.
That's not often that my flabber is absolutely ghasted, but it was this morning. I saw on Twitter that Nigel Farage had apparently called for a second referendum on the EU membership. I thought, no, that just can't be right. Why on earth would he do that? Well, it turns out that he had. He says he's close to backing a second referendum to end the whinging and whining of anti-Brexit campaigners. He says a fresh vote could kill off the Remain campaign for a generation. Well, let's start with where I agree with Nigel. I do think that if there were another referendum, the Leave side would win, and I think the Leave side would probably win with a larger majority. What if it didn't? What if it was 50.5% to 49.5%? Would that kill it off for another generation? I don't think so. I think this is a absolutely madcap idea. Nigel Farage has spent the last year, 18 months, decrying calls for a second referendum, rightly so, in my view. And he's done this because he said it would disrespect the views of the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit. We can't have never-ending referendums. What do we want? Best of 3, best of 5? I don't know. But to my mind, these are once-in-a-generation activities. You have a referendum, and then it's off the table for the next 30 or 40 years. We had one in 1975. We had one in 2016. We do not need another one now. And, of course, people who say, well, what are you afraid of in a second referendum? Personally, being a Leave supporter, I'm not afraid of anything. But why would we want to spend another £80 million when 17.4 million people, the most that have backed anything in any referendum or any election in this country in history, we've already made that decision. Otherwise, I just think, well, we shouldn't be having any referendums in this country if we're just going to have them again and again and again. So who benefits here? Well, it's certainly not the British negotiating position, because by even raising this prospect, I believe that Nigel Farage has undermined our negotiating position in Brussels. The European Commission will be licking their lips at the prospect of this, and it will encourage them to give us a worse deal than they maybe even have thought they were going to give us. And I suspect that's pretty bad. So I don't understand why Nigel has done this. No doubt he'll tell you himself after 7, because I'm at a loss to explain it personally, but I'd love to hear your views. Who do you think that this would benefit the most? And also, what about the position of the Labour Party here? Because we know lots of people have been calling for another referendum, the likes of Andrew Adonis, the likes of Chuka Umunna, who we're going to hear from in just a second. They are now going to find themselves on the same side as Nigel Farage. Well, who would have thought it, hey? Chuka Umunna and Nigel Farage and James O'Brien agreeing on something. It's a strange old world, isn't it? Well, let's talk to the man himself. Chuka Umunna, Labour MP for Streatham, leading supporter of Open Britain, joins me on the line. Well, as I say, Chuka, who'd have thought it?
Good afternoon, Ian. And my gosh, I think there's going to be a real battle in that LBC studio when Ian Dell next bumps into Nigel Farage.
Well, I will be doing so just before 7.
Angry.
Well, do you know, I am quite angry because I think that he has let down 17.4 million people by saying this. I genuinely believe that.
Well, I disagree with you on a number of levels. Let me just go through the different points that you made. I think, first of all, the 2016 referendum was a referendum, a debate that we had. I came onto your show, I think, a number of times during that campaign, where we were debating what hypothetically would happen if we voted to leave the European Union. I think the difference now, and this is, I suppose, the meeting point, is that now we've got the facts. Now, I would argue that the Brexit that people bought, the car that they bought at the time, is nothing like the clapped-out old banger which Brexit is turning out to be.
Really?
So there's no £350 million extra per week going to go to the NHS. We're going to be adhering to European Court of Justice decisions for the next few years. There's going to be a £39 billion divorce bill. All these things are new facts that we didn't know at the time that we voted, for sure, which we do now know. So I would say that, you know, the Brexit car, you thought you were getting a Mercedes, it is a clapped-out old banger. So you know, in that situation, when the car doesn't turn out to be what you think you were going to buy, then you have, you know, usually the opportunity when you're buying something to think again. Now, from a different angle, it seems to me that Nigel Farage is making the same argument. Now, he is saying that when you bought Brexit, you thought that the Brexit car would not have us being part of the EU single market and the customs union and adhering to European Court of Justice rules in it. He's like, you know, that's his version of, that's what the car that he thinks people are being sold, and he thinks that the car is a different thing too, which is why he's saying let's just settle this thing with another referendum. Now, my own view is we haven't exhausted the negotiation process yet, and we haven't had all the legislation go through Parliament. So I've got a view that I don't think Brexit is what people were sold, but in the end, we haven't exhausted that process yet. Now, if at the end of the process, which will come towards the end of this year, the beginning of next year, what I'm saying turns out to be true, then I think we should certainly have an open mind about people being able to, you know, have another say on this, which takes me to your second point.
Well,
which
just on that,
though, please,
do you think that a referendum then should be on the deal that the government does or does not do, or should it be, again, on EU membership?
No, I think it should be on the deal, and I think people should have the option of taking the deal or staying in and fighting to reform the European Union within it. So I think they should have the choice then. And I think it would be a demonstrably different debate from the one that we had in 2016 when we were all predicting what would happen, what would the EU offer us, what would we be able to get, etc. All that will fall away because we'll know there's one deal on the table. And all I'm saying is I certainly think in principle I've got no objection to people being able to choose between that deal and being able to stay in. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about, well, isn't that thwarting the will of the people? I don't think so. How can you thwart the will of the people if the people get the final say? It's not as if you voted leave in 2016. Well, hang on.
Nobody, Chuka, at the time of the referendum, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall you or anybody else saying at that point, well, we should then have a vote on the deal that the government does.
I didn't rule out having another referendum, nor did the likes of Iain Duncan
suggesting
Smith. Nor did well, I didn't rule it out because, frankly, we were just sorting that referendum out. But a number of other people, Nigel Farage, Iain Duncan Smith, the Conservative MP and leading Leave campaigner, are examples. They all said they were talking even at that stage, and like you said, I wasn't even talking at that stage. They were talking at that stage about having another referendum. But if in the end the people get the final say, nothing's been imposed on you. If you voted leave in 2016 and you still want to vote leave in 2018 or 19, nobody is forcing you to do anything different. And actually, there are a whole bunch of young people, younger generations, hundreds of thousands of them, who since the referendum now have the right to vote, who haven't had a say on any of this. And they're going to have to live with the result a lot longer than we will have to do so. So I think it's very interesting what he said. I can understand, I can totally, you know, I kind of understand where you're coming from, but you know, partly I'd say is that basically a general election which we have every 5 years is a grand referendum on a whole number of issues. I don't know why there is this kind of knee-jerk reaction against giving people a say on things. I mean, why should we always be imposing things from Westminster? Okay, well, why not let people decide things?
Shall we have a referendum on capital punishment then? Would you like that?
Well, frankly, if you had a referendum, I wouldn't be campaigning for it, but if there was a massive will in the country to have one, then I'm not going to stand in the way of it. And to be frank, I think if you did have one on that, I think actually people would not want to necessarily reintroduce the death penalty when it came down to it. I mean, look, you could have a referendum on whether you continue with the monarchy. The reason we don't have these referendums is that there isn't a huge demand. But if at the point that people see a deal and they see what it looks like and they go, hang on just a minute, this is not what I was sold. Hang on, I thought I was going to get a decent car to get me from A to B, not some clapped out old banger that's going to break down.
Look, you and I know.
You know, there will always to say you must buy the banger. Don't make people buy that clapped out old banger, Iain. Come on, you're better than that.
I think it'll be a nice new Mercedes limousine that we're talking about, rather than a clapped out old banger. But
I tell you one thing.
To be serious though, what do you think?
Nigel needs to be careful what he wishes for, because he's a bit of a cocky sod, and that's why you have him on the show.
Pot and kettle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. People would say the same about me, and I totally hold my hands up on that. But he's presuming a result. And, of course, the other big person who made a big mistake in doing so was David Cameron. I don't think David Cameron would ever have recalled the referendum if he thought in 2016 that he believed he was going to lose it. And he was slightly cocky about that too. So I'd say, it's a rare point of agreement between me and Nigel Farage. But if he... Be careful what you wish for sometimes, is what I'm saying. But if the people want the final say, who are we to impose some position on them from Westminster?
We are going to open our phone lines to the people and ask them what they want. Chuka, thank you very much. That's Chuka Umunna, Labour MP for Streatham. Mike's in Newham. Mike, what do you make of today's events?
Hi, Iain. Basically, I think a second referendum would be a stupid idea. I voted Remain. I think it would open up... Imagine, we all remember how divisive the last campaign was, and I think the next one would be even worse. I don't think there might be a slight change, but public opinion hasn't really changed that much. I think a lot of people can agree on that. People became more entrenched in the views, but I think even if Remain did win, it'd be maybe a margin, maybe 52 to 48 Remain, but who's to say that would be more legitimate than the last vote? I think the leaders would be well within the right to call for another referendum if that became the outcome. I think Farage, personally, is doing this because he likes to champion a cause, and now we've left the EU, what's there left for him, And, when we do leave the EU, and I think he would like to be the hero of democracy and challenging the establishment.
Well, there's no doubt that the first referendum would not have happened without Nigel Farage. I think it doesn't matter what side of the debate you're on. I think we can probably all agree on that. Now, I don't know whether Nigel's remarks this morning were premeditated or whether he just blurted it out. There's part of me that hopes he just blurted it out, because we can all do that in interviews sometimes, can't we? But I don't know what he hopes to achieve by it. I genuinely don't. Apart from a lot of people, I think, are going to feel very, very let down. I've been looking at the reaction from UKIP politicians to it. Not a single one of them agrees with him. Now, you might think, if you're on the other side of the argument, well, a good thing too. Anyway, Mike, thank you very much for your call. Politics is a strange beast at the moment, isn't it? It doesn't get stranger than Nigel Farage suggesting a second referendum on EU membership, does it? Lots of you have your theories. Paul, the ice cream man from Grays, as he always tells me he is. He says, Iain, do you not think it's strange that Nigel comes back from a meeting with Monsieur Barnier and changes his mind? Well, there's a conspiracy theory for you. I think that's probably one too far. You'll hear from Seven, from the man himself, as to why he's come out with this extraordinary suggestion today. I want to know who you think this would benefit most. And do you think Labour should support the idea? Because Tony Blair, you may remember, said if Labour supported the idea of a second referendum, Labour would annihilate the Tories. Not so sure myself, but I wonder what you think. Joe is in Lowestoft. Hello, Joe.
Good evening, Iain.
Evening.
I believe there's a growing realisation that Brexit, in the terms that they thought, are completely undeliverable. Just not deliverable at all. I phoned up Nigel Farage on his show last week, and I asked him what he intends to do about the Northern Ireland border, the Good Friday Agreement. I actually asked him, I asked, do you believe that referendums should be honoured? And he went on to say yes, and I stopped him halfway through, and I told him I'm on about the Good Friday Agreement, because there's no way you can honour the Good Friday Agreement without being in the single market or the customs union.
Well, I don't agree with that, but anyway.
Well, how do we do it? How do you have an open border? And this idea that we can walk away with no deal, how can you have a no deal when you've already said you're going to have an open border?
If Britain and the Republic of Ireland both say they don't want a border put up, there won't be one that's put up. The only people who are suggesting there might be is the European Union, and they don't control the border. So if Britain and the Republic of Ireland don't want a border, there won't be a border.
Well, no, there won't be, but I can't see how you can have free movement of people, free movement of trade and goods under the Good Friday Agreement, and still not be in the...
Well, you see, the weakness of that argument is if all three parties to this say that they don't want a border, why would there need to be one? A physical border. Obviously, you've got a border between Britain and the Republic of Ireland. It's just not, there aren't fences or anything. The only people that, well, in fact, nobody's really suggesting that fences should be put up. Even Brussels aren't suggesting that. So I think this is one of those issues where people use this as something to say, well, we can't possibly do it, because they don't actually want to find a solution.
Well, I don't see how you can have a free movement of goods and trade in Northern Ireland. Because there has been, I know that the UK did do impact assessments, but there has been an impact assessment done, an independent impact assessment done. It was financed by the European Union. It's available online.
How independent would that be, I wonder?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
well, you just said financed by the European Union. You've just answered your own question, haven't you?
Well, so everything they say is biased, is it? I don't know.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, it probably is, just as Sadiq Khan's independent study by Cambridge Econometrics, which is, as I understand it, has a lot of, shall we say, very Labour-friendly people working for it. I don't consider that to be an independent report either, where he says there's going to be sort of hundreds of thousands of jobs lost and all the rest of it. If you want a genuine independent report, you commission a genuine independent report.
Well, that's what they've done.
Well, paid for and financed by the European Commission. You think that that's therefore independent?
Well, if they... well, moving away from the issue, the basic facts are there has to be a border somewhere. There has to be some kind of border. And it looks identical to the agreement.
We could talk about this till the cows come home, and I suspect we're never going to agree, but I do want to stick to this question of a second referendum. Joe, thank you very much. Let's go to Lorraine, who's in Chelmsford. Hello, Lorraine.
Hello there, Iain.
Hello.
Well, to be absolutely honest with you, I can see where Nigel's coming. Us Brexiteers are getting absolutely exhausted by the whining and the lies and the bias that we have coming in for the last, 18 months. It's exhausting us all. We've got the BBC bias against us, Sky, IMF, BO, the Bank of England, the whole blooming shebang all want to stay in. But what I want to say is that the Remain campaign is not based on what it was when we were fighting for the referendum. Because now, do people want to stay? Do they want this country to become a region of a superstate called Europe? Do they want to have centralised finances, be it tax, benefits, all monetary control from Brussels? Do they want to accept the euro? Do they want the
you're kind of fighting the referendum campaign again with all of this, which I would have thought is not something you want to do.
No, they never said that we would become a region of Europe.
No, but the Leave campaign suggested it, didn't they? I mean, those arguments have already been had.
Well, I'm a Leaver. But what I'm saying is, are people aware of this? Are they, the people that want to remain, are they aware that this country will be lost?
You think Nigel Farage is right? There should be a second referendum campaign so these arguments could be exposed.
Just exhausted. I think he's exhausted by it all. And I think that if the truth were to come out, what remaining would actually mean, I think we would win, hands down. People aren't aware of the truth of remaining.
OK, Lorraine, thank you. Johnny in Hertfordshire, this is an interesting text. He says, I voted Remain, but if a second referendum is called, I think I would most likely vote Leave. The second referendum would have been brought about by an opposition to a popular vote, which to me is a rejection of democracy. We just need to get on with it now. I was talking to colleagues about this a couple of hours ago, and that's exactly the argument that I use, where I think you've got 20% on either extreme, devout Brexiteers and devout Remainers. And in the middle, you've got people who may be sort of a slightly more open-minded, and I think there'll be a lot of people like Johnny who think, no, the vote's been had, we need to get on with it. And therefore, even if they had voted Remain, a lot of them would vote Leave. That's why I think a Leave vote would still win a second referendum. But, I mean, that's just my opinion. I may well be barking up the wrong tree. Let's go to Oliver, who's in Henley-on-Thames. Hello, Oliver.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, just on that point, I'm not sure. I suspect that people would run for safety or cover and go the safe route. You might be right.
If you look at the polls on this, you've now got 72% of the British public saying just get on with it. Well, yeah, I know 72%. That's quite a lot, isn't it? When you add people who would definitely vote Leave, plus the people who voted Remain but just think that we should get on with it, that's quite a large majority.
Iain, just what I don't understand, and maybe I'm being dumb on this. Lorraine said at the last call everyone's getting tired of it. Shelagh is saying everyone thought we're getting a Rolls Royce, getting a banger. And I really like the way you do things, but I would have thought a fair question to him would be, and many others, Nick Clegg, clear evidence we're getting a banger. I don't see anything unless I'm being stupid. Where is the clear, undisputable evidence? The other presenter, O'Brien, in the morning always bangs on about you're as dumb as can be to vote to Leave. Now, there might be some people that for certain reasons were a bit silly in the reasons, but I mean, there are lots of very good reasons why you would leave.
Well, I think that
they know that you don't know, and why are we not saying to Shelagh 5 points that are a major problem?
Their problem is that all of their scare stories about the economy and about people leaving the country haven't come true. And that's where they have a very weak line of argument. And I think with regard to Chuka, I always think that it's probably best left to him to argue his own case, and people can just draw their own conclusions. Because if I go at him hammer and tong, it's not actually going to shed much light on anything, frankly. So people can draw their own conclusions. Thank you very much, Oliver. Let's go to Dan in Leicester. Hello, Dan.
Hi, how are you doing?
All right, thank you. What would you like to say?
Jolly good. My personal feeling, and I have a feeling you're going to call me a conspiracy theorist, but
I don't do that, as you well know, Dan.
I think that Nigel knows something that we don't know. And it's either something that he found out during his meeting in Europe this week, whether Michel Barnier told him that there is no way he's going to get the Brexit that he thinks he might be able to get. Whether there's a consensus between the EU and our current government that an extremely soft and bouncy Brexit is the way it's going to happen. That would be my first thought. So he basically needs a second referendum to get some clout behind his own sort of Brexit. The second and far more exciting reason is that I personally think there might be a challenge coming to the validity of the first referendum in the coming weeks.
In what way?
Well, there's two possible lines. The first one would be the investigation into the Leave campaign spending, which I have no comment on personally.
There's also an investigation into the Remain campaign spending.
I know exactly, and there's no telling which way those could turn out, and I wouldn't comment on either, just to say that they exist, and if Nigel knows more than we do about it, then that could influence him. Or there's the Russia thing, which was floated a while back.
No.
You never know. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, you had no doubt that the Russians were involved in tampering with things. I don't know what makes you think that the referendum was immune to that.
No, I'm sure that they did tamper with things. We've already seen some of the Twitter evidence of that, where this Twitter factory, I can't remember what it's called now, in St. Petersburg. I'm sure they were sending out all sorts of tweets, but I'm not sure that would have had a material impact on the result.
But wouldn't you like to know for sure that Brexit is the will of the British people?
Well, I think it is. When you have a majority of 1.7 million, I don't think even the Russians could sway the views of 1.7 million people.
Well, it would be half that they would have to sway.
Well, okay, all right, 850,000, whatever.
That's not that many people.
Yeah, if you look at the proportion of the population who are on Twitter and would follow these Russian Twitter bots, I think that's stretching it a little bit. But you may be right. We shall soon see. It's 4:36. We're talking about a possible second EU referendum, courtesy of Nigel Farage. We'll get more of your calls on that in a second. But first, the Prime Minister has pledged to eradicate all avoidable plastic waste in the UK by 2042. The commitment is part of the government's 25-year plan to improve the natural environment. She confirmed the extension of the 5p charge for plastic carrier bags to all retailers in England. She said there'll be government funding for plastics innovation. There'll be a commitment to help developing nations tackle pollution and reduce plastic waste, including through UK aid. Well, outlining the government's plan, she, as I say, pledged to eradicate all avoidable plastic waste by 2042.
In our comprehensive 25-year environment plan, we're setting out how we will protect and renew our natural inheritance for the next generation, how we will make our air and water cleaner and our natural habitats more diverse and healthy, how we will create a better world for ourselves and our children. It's a national plan of action with international ambitions. But what it really speaks to is something much more personal for each of us as human beings. That is the impulse to care for and nurture our own surroundings.
Well, let's talk to Caroline Lucas, MP for Brighton Pavilion and the co-leader of the Green Party. Caroline, very good afternoon.
Afternoon.
This must be music to your ears.
Well, it's certainly a big improvement on what we've had from this government in the past. Their record to date has been pretty abysmal. So, yes, it's certainly welcome as a first step forward. Having said that, I think what would have given us greater confidence would have been if they had also announced an Environment Act as part of this plan. In other words, a concrete legislative vehicle in which all of these things, nice words, are going to be properly set with timetables, targets, and real legal force. So that's the challenge now. We've had some warm words and some genuine steps forward, and I welcome that. But I think to be really secure and to know that this is more than, more than a Tory detoxification plan, then what we need is that Environment Act that will lock this down into legislation, and that's what we're going to be campaigning for now.
Do you think the supermarkets are going to take this very seriously? Because I saw a Conservative peer appear on Sky News this morning holding, was it an artichoke or something like that, with some plastic wrapping around it. And he said, well, there doesn't need to be this plastic wrapping. They last quite a long time anyway. Do you think that the supermarkets are going to get rid of a lot of this wrapping unless they're without legislation?
Well, I have some concern that they won't. It'll depend partly, I guess, on the level of public pressure for that. And I know that most people, if you ask them, would agree that it is a bit ridiculous to have, separate cauliflower bits covered by plastic and so on. And I think a lot of people were genuinely really shocked and moved by Blue Planet and some of the things that have been on TV recently, just really documenting in incredibly vivid terms what the impact of plastic in our environment is doing to our wildlife and to our wider environment. So, maybe public pressure will be enough, but I certainly think that we shouldn't wait too long to find that out. And if we don't see action fast enough, then absolutely we need to see legislation, not least because the target that Theresa May was talking about, in other words, eliminating all unnecessary plastics by 2042, is an awfully long time away. And it would be nice to see some real milestones and some legal moments between now and then to see whether or not we're on target. So it would have been nice, for example, if they could have moved faster on the issue of the of levies on coffee cups or on the bottle deposit return schemes. That there are practical proposals which, in fact, the Environmental Audit Committee have been proposing across party committee. It would be nice to have seen the government take some of those up now rather than setting a deadline 2042, which is a good 25 years away.
Do you believe the Prime Minister when she says the environment has been a long-held, deep priority of hers?
I think there's some cognitive dissonance, if I could use that phrase. In other words, I think that, I don't doubt that she cares about the environment. Lots of people do. But unfortunately, there isn't a connection between that feeling and then subsequent action. What worries me, for example, is that next week we may well be seeing the government giving the green light to a whole new fracking industry. They're due to give the green light to fracking up in Yorkshire. If they do that, that's a whole new fossil fuel industry, yet more climate change, and there's a complete lack of connection between what they're saying on one day, when it's the Environment Day, if you like, and what they're doing the rest of the year, which is basically business as usual. And so if we're concerned, as many people are, about marine life in the oceans, yes, plastic is a big threat, but climate change is an even bigger one in terms of warming the oceans, in terms of bleaching the corals and so forth. And so unless we have a properly joined up approach, then it is quite hard to take people's, like the Prime Minister's, statements of care about the environment entirely seriously, because they're not taking that integrated approach.
Well, I suppose in theory the whole point of conservatism is to conserve, isn't it? And Michael Gove certainly seems to have caught religion on the issue.
Well, I'd be the first person to welcome a Damascene conversion, and maybe we have seen that from Michael Gove, but let's not forget this was the same Michael Gove who not so long ago was taking, or at least seeking to take, climate change off the school curriculum. He was seeking to scrap the Habitat Directive, and he was voting to sell off the forests. So a little bit of healthy scepticism, I think, is always in good stead.
Well, and in another Damascene conversion, I guess you're on the same side as Nigel Farage today. He wants a second referendum.
Yes, I mean, I would call it a ratification referendum. What I want is a referendum on the final deal. So I'm not proposing that we simply rerun the referendum of 2016. What I think is right is that it shouldn't just be MPs who get the right to see the final deal once it's done with Brussels, but that should go back to the people so we can check that the people are happy with that final outcome. I think that is the more democratic thing to do. If Nigel Farage is now on that page too, then that's fine by me.
Caroline, thank you. That's Caroline Lucasek, the co-leader of the Green Party. Back to your calls on that idea for a second referendum from Nigel Farage. Iain is in Newtownards in Northern Ireland. Hello, Iain.
Good afternoon, Iain. I'd like to thank you first and foremost for calling out Chuka Umaga on being a bigger hypocrite as a lot of the Remainers are, and calling Nigel Farage arrogant. Certainly pot and kettle seem to fit that.
Well, yeah, he accepted the view as well, didn't he? So what would you like to say?
Okay. Essentially, as a staunch Brexiteer, I can see where Nigel Farage, I think I can see where Nigel Farage is coming from, in that he probably feels that the decision to break away from Europe has become more consolidated with the way the EU in its arrogance and dictatorial stance has tried to dictate to the UK government. I would agree with Chuka Umaga in that it's not the Brexit that I voted for. I voted to come away cleanly. I don't want European justice interference in British justice. I don't want the French and Spanish fishing fleets continuing to rape British waters, which will become sovereign waters once the UK does break away. That has to be regulated. I want regulated immigration into the country, not open borders that swamp the country. So yes, Sugarman is right in that we are getting a bit of a banger at the minute, but it doesn't mean to say that the negotiations necessarily have to continue in that vein.
Well, indeed, and we can always trade in a banger for something more expensive a little bit down the line, I suppose. Thank you very much, Iain. Philip is in Guildford. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hello, good afternoon to you, Iain. Thank you. No, briefly, I think that Nigel's position is absolutely inexplicable. I think the man's exhausted. I am a Brexit voter, and no matter what could possibly be the outcome of a second referendum, even if it broke 60-40 on either side, it would have the very opposite effect of settling anything. This situation divides the country viscerally, absolutely viscerally. But the thing about the status quo now is, the settlement now is that people accept it, because no matter where you were on the issue, people don't call into question the legitimacy of the decision that the country took, even though they don't like it. But to call for a second referendum will give the message to the country that our very democracy itself is rigged, and we're being treated the same way that Denmark was a few years ago, that Ireland has been before as well. Yeah. And I honestly believe that on the fringes of society, on the extremes of society, in that situation, there's no telling where this will take the country internally.
Well, I do think if Brexit was reversed in the way that you suggest, I'm totally with you. I think that, I would just think, what's the point in voting again? If you're taking part in a democratic vote and then the winning side is totally ignored, what's the point in going down to a polling station and putting an X in a box? Even I would be slightly reluctant to do that, I suspect. Philip, thank you very much. Well, let's go back to your calls on a second EU referendum. That is unbelievably what Nigel Farage has suggested today. He will no doubt be defending this madcap idea after 7 o'clock. David's in Hanwell. Hello, David.
Hi, Iain, how are you?
Hi, very well, thank you. What would you like to say?
Good, yeah, just three things very, very quickly. So first is, I thought Chucker's car analogy was actually really good, because I think Nigel Farage is a bit like a dodgy used car salesman, so he's just trying to move one from the other. The second point is that Nigel Farage is doing this because he seems to just be out for himself anyway, and he's not really in the papers at the moment, so this will get him back in the papers. But the third point is the most important point, which is, I don't really understand why intelligent presenters like yourself, Iain, are basically kind of glossing over the fact that when Nigel and some of his peers were talking about the referendum previously, they lied to the public, and now we're all just expected to get on with it. So,
well, it's such a tired old argument, David, I'm afraid, isn't it? Because in political... Hang on a second. Hang on, let me have my say. It is my show, after all. It's a tired old argument because in any political campaign, people who don't agree with one side will accuse the other side of lying. And yes, there were lies told on both sides of the argument. Can we agree on that, David?
Perhaps. I can't actually say. If you can give me some clear lies from the other side, then I can agree with you. But at the moment, all I know at the moment was that they lied, and they lied not.
Well, all right. You've challenged me to give you a lie that the Remain campaign told. Let me start off with this: George Osborne saying that there would have to be an emergency budget within 3 weeks of the referendum, and taxes would have to go up, and the economy would go to hell in a handcart. That was a lie. Wasn't it?
Slightly different.
Wasn't it?
60 million people, you'll get £350 million per week for the NHS.
Well, Nigel Farage didn't say that. That was the Vote Leave campaign.
No, but he didn't disagree with that.
Yes, he did disagree with it. He said many times, in the referendum and afterwards, that he wouldn't have used that argument, and he thought it was wrong.
But now we're all better informed, hopefully, about it. Why would it be such a bad thing to have a second referendum? If it comes out...
Well, why not have a third or a fourth? If it doesn't go the way you like it, would you like to have a third one?
No, that's just being childish. And you don't actually know which way I voted. You don't know which way I voted yet, but I'm saying...
Well, I think I can have a pretty good guess.
It should be based on fact, So, for example, if we were in court And the information...
It's not a courtroom. It's a political campaign where people use all sorts of methods of campaigning on both sides. And I mean, if we're going to go down that route, let's refight the 2017 general election, shall we? And look at all of Labour's promises on funding. Should we do that as well? It's a facile argument, David, I'm afraid. Right, we're going to move away from this because Nigel Farage will no doubt be talking about it after 7. Now, dozens of senior A&E doctors have written to the Prime Minister spelling out the dangers patients are facing this winter. At the same time, hospital bosses are warning that they've run out of beds. Last week, there was a point where 133 out of 137 hospital trusts had an unsafe number of patients on their wards. Figures out today show that only 85% of patients in A&E departments were seen within the 4-hour target in December, marginally worse than the previous low of January 2017. Scotland has also issued its worst ever figures for A&E waits. It said we need 10 to 15,000 extra beds. So which taxes would you put up to pay for them? Income tax? VAT? Council tax? Any tax? No tax?
And good evening, everybody. I'd wanted that Brexit referendum, and I'd fought for it for about a quarter of a century. And you know what? In the face of the global elites and the big businesses and everybody lining up to say that if we dared vote Brexit, ruin, plague and pestilence would come upon us, we still defied them and we won. And I have been taking the view, I think, of all leavers since the referendum, that we've had a vote, it wasn't the best of 3. Hey, can we please accept we've taken this fork in the road, and will you please, our government and parliament, get on and carry out the will of the people? So the last thing I've ever wanted is another referendum on this issue. But I began to realise since Monday, when I went to meet Mr. Barnier, that it's just not as simple as that. Because my pessimism in that meeting with Barnier, realising he's not going to give us a good deal, was of course backed up by the 3 leading British businessmen who went to see him yesterday. We are not going to be offered a grown-up, rounded trade and services deal. Whatever gets put to Parliament is now, I think, likely to be rejected. Even if there was a majority in Parliament that would have voted for Brexit before the general election in June, now there are actually more Tory rebels who would vote against their government on this than there are Labour MPs who would defy their own side. I fear that Parliament will reject any deal, and I fear that Parliament, both the Commons and the Lords, may well do everything they can to put us through a second referendum. And bear in mind the timeline on this. This deal with Europe has to be finished by October. It could be before the end of this year that Parliament is voting on the final deal. So much as I don't want a second referendum, I have now begun to open my mind to the possibility that this may be forced upon us. I've seen the Labour Party completely change its position. I mean, so much so that if we didn't have a referendum in the next couple of years, I can actually see them fighting the next election with a promise to give us one. I am saying this to leavers. Please don't be complacent. Please don't think, because we won this great historic referendum, that it's all over. Look at what's going on with the Remain side. They're on the streets of London every day with their flags and their leaflets. Where's the Leave side? Well, many of the most prominent players are now in government, and so actually are bound by collective responsibility. Most of the Leave organisations have wound down. We don't even have a coherent voice of leavers working together from a business perspective. I'm doing this today. I'm saying, please get yourselves ready. There may well be a second referendum on this. This is meant to be, actually, a wake-up call to leavers. I genuinely believe we must prepare for the possibility of a second referendum, whether we like that prospect or not. So, we've heard today a lot of comment from Tory MPs and others who are horrified by the prospect, because, of course, they fear it would rip their party apart. Similarly with the Labour Party, you know, that may well put the parliamentary Labour Party totally at odds with a third of their voters in the country. I've written about this on the Telegraph website. I haven't reached this conclusion comfortably or easily, but my meeting with Barnier convinced me we are not going to get a good deal, and Parliament isn't going to accept it. And don't forget, They've won that concession, haven't they, to have a meaningful vote on whatever the deal is. Please don't think, if Parliament rejects the deal, that we just crash out on WTO lines. That's the optimistic view put out by Leavers. Sorry, folks, our political class won't let us get away with it. So there may well be one last dramatic battle in all of this that will take place. And if it does, I'm confident that actually the Leave side would win by a bigger majority, and we'd be able to send Blair, Clegg and Adonis into outer space. So let's hear what you've got to say. Do you think, like me, that the Leave side should be beginning to plan for a second referendum? And if you do, call me on 0345 6060 973, or perhaps you think, no, it's a waste of time, we've won, it's all going to be fine, then text to 84850. Or perhaps you're a Ramona who actually can't believe that for the first time ever you agree with something that I'm saying, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch me on Facebook and, of course, comment there too. Jean is a new caller to the show. She's calling from Canterbury. Good evening, Jean.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you. Yes, I'm a first-time caller, so I want to say hello. I'm also a Brexiteer. I've got several points to make about this. I do not think we should have another referendum. We've already voted once. How many more topics of different discussions are we going to have in this country for it to be a case of, oh, have we now got the right answer and upset people and all this sort of thing? No, I think it should be as it is. What we should have done back a long time ago, 18 months or however long it's been since we first knew, is I think that Theresa May should have set up a panel, literally about 3 or 4 people who are the brains of the country, perhaps even yourself included, because you were a staunch Brexiteer and know about government and what goes in, but say like the CEO of Next, or even Lord Sugar, even somebody from Fisheries and all the other different departments, all get their heads together. They're used to negotiating on a day-to-day basis and could go in hard. I think that she should have just set up that panel, let them get on with it, let her do the rest of the country, okay, to sort out things of more consequence, like the NHS and all these other departments that she's got.
No, Jean, there is an argument. There is an argument, Jean, that Brexit is taking over the government. They haven't got time to do other stuff, and I understand what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. She should have done that ages ago. The other thing I wanted to say, I was just trying to get on the other day onto your show to ask you to have taken a question. I don't know whether this has actually been asked of Barnier, was to find out what the terms of exit were for the Canadian government when they went out, whether we could have had something similar.
Jean, that's a different issue. The Canadians have a deal on goods but not services, which I'm struck is what Barney is offering us. Jean, back to your first point, the most important point. I understand what you say. We voted. We should leave. But, Jean, what I'm saying to you today is, what if a second referendum is forced upon us? Shouldn't, Jean, people like you and I on the Leave side prepare for that possibility?
Well, as I said, I feel so strongly about this issue. I even said to my partner, I feel like writing to the Queen about all the points I want to make all about this, because I'm up to here with it. The fact that we've had this referendum, we've got a clear thing. Why can't we just leave it there for once? How many more referendums?
I know, Jean, Jean, I don't want another referendum, but I fear it's going to be forced upon us. I thank you for your call and for your passion. And you can write to the Queen, and you can call LBC, and you can tell your neighbours and shopkeepers. But the trouble is, it's Westminster. It's the House of Commons and the appalling House of Lords who, frankly, could impose this upon us. I get told by text, don't you dare put us through another referendum. I don't want to, but what if it's forced upon us? Shouldn't Leavers start to get themselves organised? Shouldn't we start to lobby MPs, particularly in Leave voting constituencies? Corbyn and May cannot come out and say they agree with you, or can they? Well, the government, number 10, has responded by saying there won't be another referendum. Of course they have. Iain from Frinton says, fab on the right stuff today. That's the programme I was on Channel 5 this morning. Yes, second referendum to shut all these losers up once and for all. Well, that was kind of one of the things I joked about this morning, that actually if we won a second referendum with a bigger majority, maybe that would be the referendum to end all referendums. I don't know. I don't want it, but I fear it may be coming down the track. Harry is calling from Nottingham. Good evening, Harry.
Good evening, Nigel. I heard your remarks today, and I couldn't believe just how naive you were, because we had a referendum 2 years ago that settled the question, Remain and leave. There have been politicians from the Remain side who want to overturn the result. By your statement, what you did today, you've just given them ammunition, and this isn't the first time you've done it. I remember reading your book that you wrote 3 years ago, and you said in that book that if you lost your seat in South Thanet, you would resign as UKIP leader. That was foolish as well, because that gave the ammunition to the other side to determine to beat you. So we shouldn't be preparing for a second referendum.
We shouldn't.
Because no, we shouldn't, because the referendum, the government said in the leaflet that was posted through that door, that would be the final decision, and the government would respect that decision.
And you trust them, Harry, do you?
It would cause, in my opinion, the MPs won't have the bottle to do it, because it would cause such a constitutional crisis that if they went against what this referendum was, I would fear what would happen. Secondly, if there was a second referendum, and the only time I'd be prepared to have a second referendum, remaining in the EU shouldn't be on that ballot paper. What should be on the ballot paper is whether we accept the government's deal, or if we don't accept it, we go on to WTO rules. Because the Lib Dems say, well, we chose our destination, we chose the cause of destination to go on, so we should set the terms that we should leave on it. Well, actually, they're kind of going against what they're saying, because remaining in the EU was ruled out in last year's referendum. If you're going to have a referendum, you should decide how you should leave the EU. So,
Harry, the problem is, Harry, it won't be us making these decisions. You know, and I'll tell you what would be naive, Harry, really incredibly stupid and crazily naive, and that would be to allow the Remain organisations between now and the end of the year to build up war chests of millions and millions of pounds, to get their street campaigns going all over the country, to build up their social media profile, to, as they do every week, get their negative business messages going out through the media. What would be naive, Harry, is if we, the Leavers, continue to be fractured, splintered, not campaigning, not putting out messages, not pressurising MPs. That, Harry, in my view, would be naive, because I think the best way to protect our great victory is to be prepared if they come at us again.
But by making those remarks, right? You know, we spoke about when Trump retweeted Britain First, and the media did the wrong thing by promoting Britain First. By what you've just done today, you have promoted the idea that there may be a second referendum. Don't give these people airspace. Ignore them.
What I've tried to do, Harry,
just let them carry on.
Harry, what I've tried to do, I promise you, for the last 6 months, I've met several people, a lot of people, who played prominent roles in the Leave campaign. I've urged a number of business leaders, please can you come together as a coherent group and start countering the Goldman Sachs and organised stuff that we see in the press every week. And Harry, I completely and utterly have failed, I will admit to you, to bring anyone together, to give any coherence to any sense of a Leave campaign right now. So I've done it in public, and I hope it gives everyone a kick up the backside and we start to get ourselves prepared. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. I've opened my mind to the fact that a second referendum on the European question may be coming. It's never what I've wanted, but I fear that we now have a Parliament, we now have a Commons and a Lords where Brexit is without doubt in a minority, and I'm concerned this could be forced upon us and that the Leave side has made simply no preparations at all because we're so busy saying, we won, it's over, get over it, let's move on. I've been saying that. I've been saying that ever since the referendum, whenever I've heard Blair, Adonis, Clegg, any of them. But my meeting this Monday with Monsieur Barnier has convinced me we are not going to get a good deal and Parliament is going to reject it. Sandra says on Facebook, if we have a second referendum, and we had a big Leave majority, it won't stop the moaners. It'll just make them worse. We'll be back to square one. No, Sandra, I disagree. I think a second referendum would be won with the Leave side with a bigger majority, and that, I think, would be the end of it, and we could send the Ramonas into outer space. That is my feeling. We'd settle it once and for all if That's what we have to do. And similarly, you know, Tony says to me on Twitter, what makes you think that if the Leave side win again, anything would change? Again, if you've won twice and you've won with a bigger majority, I do think that would be the end. What about the youth vote? Remain would make sure those youngsters too lazy to vote last time would sway it for them, says Becky. Well, Becky, you're right to say that the youth in this country voted to Remain, which is fascinating, because across the whole of the rest of Europe, it's the youth that want to leave the euro, and in Italy now, amongst the under-40s, pretty much a majority to leave the European Union. So, hey, there'd be lots of battles to fight. I understand that. I'd rather we weren't even having this conversation, but I really do fear what our career professional politicians will do to us. I hold them in such contempt that I do not trust them, and I genuinely believe they're going to force this upon us again. We mustn't get taken without some degree of preparation. Matt is a new caller to the show. He lives in Stoke-on-Trent. Good evening, Matt.
Hello, Nigel. How's it going?
Well, I mean, I find myself in an odd place, Matt, today, because I find myself saying something that I've been fighting against in my own mind for the best part of 18 months. But Matt, I just feel this could be forced upon us. We must be prepared.
Well, I find myself in a funny position as well, because I'm a Corbynite Labour supporter, so probably we don't see eye to eye on everything. But Brexit is one of those things that we do generally tend to agree on.
Yeah.
What you've had to say for your career so far. What surprises me, I suppose, is that, you know, from day one, since the referendum, we've known that the Remainers have been clamouring for a second vote. They've been saying all sorts of stuff. We were tricked by a number on the side of the bus and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Indeed, yeah.
Matt, don't forget the Russians. Don't forget the Russians. You know, they must have played a role in this somewhere, you know.
Well, you know, if things aren't going your way, you can always blame Vladimir Putin, can't you?
Absolutely.
But the thing that concerns me is that I feel that if people on the Leave side now start talking about the prospects of a second referendum rather openly as well, aren't we sort of giving oxygen to these people who want to force a second vote? Like, do you not feel that we're kind of adding to the momentum of that?
I do accept the risk of that, Matt. I do accept the risk of that. But against that, as I say, I've been trying for months behind the scenes to get business players and political players together to form a united campaigning group, a sort of Brexit means Brexit type group, to put pressure on MPs to start making the arguments. And Matt, I failed to get anyone together at all. So I'm hoping that by my saying, I fear that a second referendum may be coming, that we may just get some levers together, because we need to keep fighting for that victory. I mean, it's often said, isn't it, the best way to preserve the peace is to prepare for the next war, and that's kind of how I feel about it, Matt.
I could understand that reasoning. There was just one thing I wanted to clarify. I'd seen you speaking on the Right Stuff earlier on today.
Yep.
And what I gathered from that interview is that perhaps you thought maybe the prospect of a second vote would be a good idea, sort of put the issue to bed. So.
Well, no. The one good thing, Matt. The one good thing about it is it would give us the possibility of putting it to bed for a generation once and for all. But to be clear, Matt, I am not campaigning for a second referendum, but I've opened my mind to the possibility that it could happen.
Well, at the very least, then, I'll say I agree with you that I don't want there to be a second referendum, but if it looks like it's likely, then, yeah, probably best to be prepared at the very least.
Yeah, and so if it happens, Matt, you know, will you and I find ourselves arm locked out there together campaigning for Britain?
What, Labour and UKIP standing shoulder to shoulder?
Yeah, could you do that to make sure Brexit happens?
Well, I'll tell you what, stranger things have happened, haven't they?
They really have. Matt, great call. Thank you very much indeed for that. Nigel, we do need another referendum. Accept or reject the deal. The government cannot be trusted. Well, there are many that think the government can't be trusted, but it's not... I mean, although I've got big problems with the government and what they're doing, my real problem is I don't trust the House of Commons, and I certainly don't trust the House of Lords on this issue. Peter lives in Southampton. He's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, what do you think? Should the levers get ready, or is it all a done deal?
Well, I think you're quite right to suggest that a second referendum is a definite possibility. I think it's been on the cards for quite some time. Matt, from your previous caller, just stole my thunder a little bit.
Oh, did he?
Because it seems, a little bit, because it seems very inconsistent in what you said on the TV this morning and the tweet that you put out. Maybe, just maybe, we should have a second referendum, which is very different to what you're saying now.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Look, rather than being in denial over this, Okay, Peter, I've been in denial over this. I've been shouting at the Ramonas and saying it isn't going to happen. There won't be a second referendum. It's all going to be okay. And I'm now thinking, do you know what? If they force this upon us, let's get prepared for it. Let's take it on. Let's not whinge. Let's win it by a bigger margin.
But the story you've created isn't that. The story that you've created is, I think we should have a second referendum.
Of course.
Nigel Farage, all the newspapers
Peter, of course.
Aaron Banks of course. He's tweeting today, Nigel is a visionary. He's ahead of the curve on this one.
Peter, that's what the media do. The media never, ever will take any nuanced argument. You know, Evening Standard, front page, Farage demands second referendum. I don't. But I have opened my mind up to the fact that it may well happen, and if it does, let's do it, let's greet it, and let's win it.
So one journalist today brought up a quote that was attributed to you, and I never knew if it was true or not, but on the night of the referendum, you supposedly famously said that if the vote was 52 to 48, it would be unfinished business, and of course it was.
No, I said, Peter, I said there would be some in the Tory party who would go on calling for a second referendum, but in reality, I doubted we'd get one for another quarter of a century, and believe me, had Remain won, we would not be having this debate tonight. It's just because the establishment lost, but the trouble is, Peter, the establishment are in a majority in both Houses of Parliament.
I appreciate that, and I think you're quite right to say a second referendum is very likely, which personally I dread the idea of, because the referendum as a whole, I think did such damage to us socially. No one's come back together. Both sides have got completely entrenched on their position. There's very little middle ground. I can't see how a second referendum is going to do anything but reopen all those wounds again, which is why I was staggered from that quote from you this morning.
Yeah, well, Peter, as I say, I fear this is going to be put upon us. I hope I'm absolutely wrong. I hope that Brexit goes through and we leave on the 29th of March 2019, no problem. But I really have a great concern that whatever deal is agreed by Barnier will not be seen to be good enough by the UK Parliament. And I think that's exactly what Barnier and the European Union want. And if that sounds a bit conspiratorial, I don't care. That's what I believe after my meeting there on Monday. Peter, I thank you. I'm going to go to Steve in Red Hill, another new caller. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, Nigel. Very nice to speak to you.
Thank you,
yes,
call.
I think you've played a very shrewd move today. I think you need to regather the troops, and I think we have to be prepared for a second referendum, even though we don't want one. I was speaking to my sister-in-law today, and there's a lot of people that are still naive to what the EU is all about. And I think we need to gather the troops up together and get out there again and get the leave word out there.
Yeah, no, Steve, I think that's right. Do you know what? We have given these Ramonas, these professional career politicians, a free run for the last 18 months. You know,
we have it on the BBC, we have it on Sky, we have it all over the place.
It never ends.
No, it never ends.
It never ends, and their friends in business put out negative stories week after week after week. And Steve, don't think this isn't organised and coordinated, because it jolly well is. Don't think...
Absolutely.
And it's well funded too. And you know, do you remember in the referendum, Steve, you'd go out on a Saturday and there'd be over 1,000 towns across the country where there'd be a stall and there'd be people from Leave.eu and Vote Leave out, giving out leaflets, collecting email addresses.
I was an activist for the grassroots in Red Hill.
Grassroots out, yeah. But all of that stopped. All of that stopped.
There's nothing now.
And yet, Steve, I can tell you that some of the Remain organisations are out on Saturdays in London and Birmingham and elsewhere. So you're quite right, Steve. I am rallying the troops. That is exactly what I'm doing. I'm saying, leavers, this is a wake-up call. You know, if we do rally the troops, organise, start to pressure MPs, it may well be unnecessary, because Brexit may well go through. Parliament may well not force us to have a second referendum. But what if they do, and they're organised and we're not? That, frankly, would be absolute madness. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. So distrust and dislike our career politicians in the House of Commons and the House of Lords that I fear they're not going to accept the instruction they got on the 23rd of June 2016. They will reject whatever deal Mr. Barnier gives us, and they may well force us to have a second referendum. And so I've gone from a position of being in denial over it and saying there won't be a second referendum because there doesn't need to be, to one that says, you know, if they do this to us, let's embrace it, let's do it, let's go with it, and let's start preparing for it right now. And it's an interesting thought. What would happen? What would happen if Parliament forced the people to vote again? What would that do to people? Would it make them angry? Would it make them pleased? And I picked up a little piece of advice here. Now, Gunster Strategies, run by Jerry Gunster, based in Washington, D.C., they were the advisors to Leave.eu as they put together their bid to try and win the nomination to run the referendum. But his comment this afternoon is interesting. He says, in my 30 years of running referendum campaigns, any winning campaign that has been called for a revote, those second votes have matched or exceeded the original margin of victory. I concur with Mr Farage that the percentage that would vote to leave next time would be bigger if this issue was called for a second vote. So, you know, there's somebody who runs referendums in America all the way through saying if you force people to rerun a question, actually, they get pretty blooming angry that their government or parliament didn't listen to them first time round. Peter is calling from Battersea. He's a new caller. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening. How you doing?
Yeah, so, Peter, do you think there's a possibility that the House of Commons and Lords could force a second referendum upon us?
I would hope so.
You would hope so?
I really hope so, yeah. I mean, I don't agree with anything that you say, other than facing up to reality. And the reality is that politicians need to keep the peace, frankly. And I've always been very pro staying in the EU. I run a business. I see the impact of the lack of confidence that's happening on the market today. My question was, and I said to your researcher, you said I've failed to get people to buy in, to commit, to support my cause. My question is, why do you think that is? Maybe it's because they don't believe in it as much as you do.
No, I think they do believe in it, Peter, incredibly strongly. And you know, you saw those three very senior business figures there at the European Commission yesterday drawing a conclusion from the meeting with Barnier that actually was even more pessimistic than the one that I drew on Monday. No, I think, I'll tell you what it is. The Leave side, and I was one of them until earlier on this week, the Leave side think we've won this great historic victory, and it's going to happen, and therefore we don't need to do anything about it. And I think that's wrong, because, Peter, I think that the Ramonas, call it what you will, are very organised, they're well-funded, they're out there campaigning every single day, and I am urging, and, OK, you're not a Leave voter, but I'm urging Leave voters to be prepared, because we may well have a second referendum forced upon us. It's just as simple as that.
I think you're absolutely right. I do agree with you. I do agree with you that they do need to be prepared. You're absolutely right. But coming back to your point that you were talking about the statistician that was saying about people redoing referendum, I think the issue that we've got here is that the people that voted, I do think they voted with misinformation. I genuinely believe that. And I know that it's easy for me to say that, but I genuinely believe, because everything that's come out afterwards, and I agree with you, Project Fear was bad. That's not a good way to do it. I totally agree with you. Negativity never wins any kind of deal, but I think there's enough come out of it for people who did vote to leave to say, hang on a minute, what happened to all those people? I mean, frankly, the people that were running the campaign, the way they ran away from it afterwards and the way that it disintegrated was frankly pretty disgraceful. Well, it doesn't matter whether you're voting for it or not.
Well, Peter, many of the leading voices in the Leave campaign are now in the cabinet, so you know that's kind of the way it worked out. So they hardly ran away. Peter, I thank you for your call, and I know that this week we've had a lot of new listeners to the show, a lot of new people engaging. I can see that from the calls. I just want to say this to you, that, you know, I run this show. I've got my own opinions. You know what, not all, but you know what many of them are, and I believe them and hold them strongly. But the whole point about LBC is it is the one format in British politics where, rather than just journalists talking about politicians or journalists talking about journalists, you, the public, can get engaged. And within reason, provided you're polite, because we are before the watershed, you know, provided you're polite, you can say what you like. So please, if you think you're sitting there at home, you're in the car, wherever, and you think, you know, we've just turned onto this Farage bloke, he's talking complete and utter tosh. Well, it's very easy. You just ring 0345 60 60 973 and you can have your say, I promise you. Let's go to Benjamin, another new caller from Kings Langley. Benjamin, good evening.
Good evening. I just wanted to firstly ask you why, after Shelagh Fogarty invited you on her show, you declined?
I declined about 28 media requests, Benjamin. I didn't do any today.
Oh, I mean, she said that she was in the studio with you and you declined. But anyway...
No. I declined Shelagh Fogarty. I declined Iain Dale. I declined the LBC Daily Podcast and every other single broadcaster. You know, there are times when you've put something out there, let people think about it, let them kick it around, and I had the chance to come back tonight at 7 o'clock to talk about it and to write something for the Telegraph Online, all right?
Okay, no, I just, in my head, I thought it was maybe that you needed the time to kind of think of something, you know, to say that was, you know, as disingenuous as most of the things you say are.
Oh, Benjamin, oh, come on, grow up. Do you have a sense of... I mean, because, there's a lot of people want to get on this show, Benjamin. You got something sensible to say, let's hear it, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you say sensible, but you're still using the word Ramona. But anyway, the point I wanted to make is you claimed today, or when you said on national TV, that you wanted to kill off the Remain parties, kind of Ramonas and all that sort of stuff. I'm a Remainer. I voted Remain in the referendum, and I did exactly what you said. If you voted Remain, the public have spoken, and you suck it up, basically. I did that. I've now accepted the result, and now all of a sudden you've done this U-turn. And if you had listened to Sheila's show earlier, there were a lot of people that were really big fans of yours that were really, really let down by you.
Of course, Benjamin. Of course, Benjamin, because they think I've opened a campaign for a second referendum. I haven't. I am preparing. I've opened my mind to the possibility that this could get forced upon us. I've come out of the denial that I think a lot of Leavers are in, where they think it's a done deal. I'm fearful, Benjamin. I'm genuinely fearful that the Commons and the Lords will force us to vote again, and I want Leavers to be prepared and organised.
Well, as you say, if you say so.
Well, I do say so, and I just think it would be a huge mistake. The other side are organised, they're funded, they're doing their stuff. Benjamin, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Second referendum would not shut up the Ramonas. Don't give them any more to moan about, says John from Abbeywood. Well, 3 or 4 of you have said, even if the Leave side win by 60%, it won't stop things. Actually, I think that it would. And I do accept the criticism from John that, you know, by talking about this, by saying I accept the fact that it could happen, that it allows people like the Mayor of London to go on and argue for a second referendum. John, I do accept that. I do accept that. But, hey, they were talking about it anyway. You know, Mr. Blair, others, Vince Cable we had in this studio, there's been a big campaign for a second referendum, and my fear is that when push comes to shove, when the chips are really down in Parliament, they will have a majority. That is my... Goodness me. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this country does not have to go through a second referendum. It's the last thing I want, but it could happen. Just look at the Labour Party. Look how Corbyn, running on a manifesto, leading the party, saying they would leave the European Union, the single market, and take back border controls. There aren't many Labour MPs saying that these days, are there? Gary on Facebook says, the terrible behaviour of the EU dictators during the first round negotiations has certainly swung the Leave vote to a bigger margin, I would think. Gary, I agree with that. I also think that if you, and I get a text here backing it up, can we make sure in the next referendum that Remain means joining Schengen, the Euro, a United States of Europe and the European Army? And Gary, that's the other point, is that since the Brexit vote, Mr Juncker, the European Parliament, everybody has made it clear they are pushing on to the United States of Europe. I think it would be very, very difficult for the Remain side to convince Britain to go back into something that would mean a European army and the Euro. In fact, I'm absolutely certain we simply wouldn't do it. Paul is calling from Attleborough in Norfolk. Good evening, Paul.
Yes, good evening, Nigel. Hi.
Hello. So should Leavers prepare, or should we just say, it's OK, we've won?
Well, I don't think there's a need for another referendum.
No. Nor do I, but there could be one.
Well, I need to ask you why. We've had the referendum.
Yep.
The result was to leave.
Yep.
If by any chance the government, the Parliament, either the House of Lords or the Commons, rejects any deal, then the result of the referendum still stands. So we are still leaving the European Union. So don't we just then have to leave on WTO rules?
Well, I thought that until last Monday, yeah. That was how I was thinking, Paul.
What's changed?
I was quite bullish about it, but I'm now beginning to see. I frankly believe that the European Commission, Monsieur Barnier, and the political establishment in this country are working together. And the idea that a rotten deal, Paul, gets rejected by Parliament and that we then just crash out on WTO rules, Parliament won't let that happen. They just won't let that happen.
But constitutionally, how can they stop it? Because the referendum result still stands. Because
they can vote for us to have another referendum, to revoke Article 50 and to have another referendum. And they could do that. Paul, I very much... Listen, I want to repeat this point to you. You know, I've been in the same place that you've been in. You know, we've done it, we've won, it's going to be okay. And I hope that's the case. But I have opened my mind to the possibility that that may not be the case, and I want us to be prepared.
Okay, well, if they do that, that would be such an obvious travesty of democracy.
Yes.
And I think they'd have a problem.
Do you know what, Paul? So do I. So do I, and we could finish them off once and for all. Thank you. I don't want another referendum, but you know what? There might well be one, because a lot of our political class, and I believe a majority in the Commons and the Lords, would like this to be the case. If it's going to happen, well, I'm now fully out of denial over this. If it happens, fine. We'll take it on and we'll win it, but we've got to start preparing. We've got, as Leavers, to start fighting back. And someone on Twitter agrees with me, saying it's good what Nigel has done. He has reignited the debate. Brexiteers need to be more proactive. The PM has to be held accountable. She needs to be kept in check. Others very worried and saying if Remainers won the second referendum, that would be 1-1, and that would inevitably lead to the call for a third referendum. Best to leave things as they are. I agree with you. I agree with all of you who want things left as they are, fearful that you open a can of worms, fearful. I mean, I do actually believe that Leave would win now by a much bigger margin, but fearful if that was not the case, this could engulf us for the next decade. I am not campaigning for a second referendum, but I've opened my mind to the possibility that it might well happen. Helen is a new caller from Watford. Good evening, Helen.
Hi, Nigel. You've just spoke about what I'm calling about.
Go on.
What if we lose the second one?
Oh, yeah.
That really, you're going down a dangerous path with this second referendum. If Leave loses,
yeah,
it would be chaos. So I agree with you. I mean, we would have civil riots. I agree with you rallying the troops.
Yeah.
Brexit needs to be fighting. We've gone far too quiet.
We sure have.
But don't rally the troops in the way of a second vote. Rally the troops in the way that we need to demand that we get a proper Brexit team, demand that we get a leader that the people voted for. We need a leader that we're happy with. Nobody's happy with Theresa May. Nobody.
No, I think that's probably quite true, although she's seen by some to sort of keep the peace in the Tory party between their warring wings. Helen, we've not even... I mean, all over the Midlands and the north of England and South Wales, you've got constituencies where people voted solidly to leave, and yet where the MPs are strongly Remain. I think the Leave side should be putting huge pressure on the MPs sitting in those constituencies. There's a whole lot to do. I understand your point that a second
You're correct. Rally the troops.
Yes.
Please stop talking about a second referendum.
Helen, I don't want Helen to refight. I don't want to refight a battle we've won. I'm just scared it may be forced upon us. I promise you, Helen, and I can tell the sincerity in your voice, I promise you, Helen, I'm not going to go out there and campaign for a second referendum. If I get a vote on it anywhere, I'd vote against it. But it may be forced upon us. That, Helen, is how disconnected our political class are with people like you.
How can they force it upon us?
They can force it upon us by voting it through the Commons and the Lords. They can force the government into doing it. It may not happen, Helen, but it makes sense. In every walk of life, it makes sense to take out an insurance policy, whether it's fire or theft, for your house, for your car, for whatever it is. It makes sense to have insurance. And our insurance as Leavers would be to start campaigning again, being active, putting massive pressure on the government and on our MPs, saying, give us the Brexit we voted for. And the Brexit that Helen in Watford most certainly voted for. And I thank you very much indeed for your call. There will be a second referendum, Nigel. It'll be called a general election. And the Leavers in the Tory party need to get a grip of Brexit negotiations and provide positive vision. If we go through to the next general election, having left the European Union, but still stuck inside a transition period, then I think there's a very strong chance that the Labour Party, certainly the Parliamentary Labour Party, in its current mood, would promise a referendum for us to stay part of the single market and the customs union. I mean, I just don't see this going away. The establishment doesn't actually feel like it's been beaten, and that's my concern. Nick is calling from Cheltenham. Good evening, Nick.
Good evening, Nigel. I'm afraid I am a Ramona, so sorry about that. Take up your point about a second referendum.
Yeah.
I do think if you do decide to, as you say, rally the troops, you need to probably get on with it, because unfortunately, there's no easy way to say it, a lot of them will start passing away.
Will they?
It generally tends to be an older vote that goes for Brexit. I still can't understand why we had a referendum in the first place, to be honest.
Well, that was to do with pressure on David Cameron and his fear that a significant number of his MPs would defect to UKIP. That is what prompted this.
That was what triggered it, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that we are where we are. I mean, you know, I don't wish to sound disparaging about the Brexit voters, but most of them are politically ignorant. So
Nick, you mustn't do that. You mustn't do that. You mustn't sound like, you know, the career politicians that Brexit voters don't wash and they're thick and they're old and they're... I mean, come on.
Well, no, I disagree. No, I mean, you played a very good card on immigration. So you twisted the vote on Europe to immigration, and
wasn't much twisting needed, Nick, was there really?
I didn't like that advert you put on about the migration, so I thought that was in very poor taste. But
well, the truth. Do you know what, Nick? The truth often does upset people. Let me ask you, Nick. Let me ask you. So, do you want to join the euro?
No, but no.
No, I'm asking you. Do you want to join the euro?
People called expert. If you ask the average Joe in the street who voted Brexit, you'll get some waffle. They'll say, "Oh, we want our country back."
I'm asking you, Nick, from Cheltenham.
Nobody knows what
Nick, do you want to join the euro? Do you want to join the Schengen area? Do you want to join the European army? Do you want to be part of the United States of Europe?
Do you know what? I don't know the answers to those questions because I haven't got the expertise in that area, so I allowed the decision to be made by the politicians that I vote for.
OK, but if there was another referendum, Nick, if there was another referendum, it'd be put back to you. I mean, one thing's very interesting. I tell you this, Michel Barnier said to me, we were talking about the Europe they're creating, he said to me on Monday, this is not a federal Europe, it is a unified Europe. I said, Monsieur Barnier, I couldn't agree more. A federal Europe would imply that member states could make their own laws over a whole variety of things. This is a unified central Europe where the laws are made by people. It's very difficult to get wrong. Nick, I thank you. I'm going to take one more caller because there's loads of you that want to call. Seb is calling from Manchester. Good evening, Seb. I'm putting the proposition that there could be a second referendum forced upon us and that Leavers need to wake up to that.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I've gone on a little journey this morning. I started off seeing your little clip and thinking, what are you going on about? But actually, as I've thought about it throughout the day, I've come around to your way of thinking, and I think that as a Leave voter, the campaign for the second referendum started the day after Brexit, really, or the day after the referendum. There's plenty for anyone to see. It's really the case that the track record of the EU is that they get their way. France, Netherlands were ignored. Ireland were made to vote again.
Yep.
So we need to prepare in terms of what we think that the Remain campaign is going to do. They're not going to try Project Fear again because they know it didn't work. They can't say that we're going to be, £500 million worse off by 2030. We'll see through that. So they're going to be much more intelligent, much more logistical support. And so we need to think about what we're going to do because otherwise we're going to have a Brexit which is based on sand, and we need more of a foundation. So I think that's what you were trying to get at. But what do you think?
I have to say, Seb, that, frankly, those that have campaigned for Leave are now disparate. There is no organised campaign of any kind. There is no collective joint business voice. Many of the leading voices for Leave are now cabinet ministers. UKIP at the moment are, whilst they're there in the opinion polls at 5% or whatever, but they're not posing the kind of threat to Labour or Conservative that they were at one point. They may do again, who's to say? And Seb, I just think the Leave side need to up their game and keep this campaign going. We have won a great victory, but hey, you know what? It's not all over. Seb, I thank you. I'm fearing one last great final battle, one last confrontation. Maybe the referendum to end all referendums. I don't know. I don't want it, but I've changed my mind since Monday. I now begin to think that it's a real possibility. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on OEC.